I'm going to start with a comment that someone made. It was regarding an interview I had a week ago now with Ed Dutton, okay, interview slash debate. Okay, and this is what this fellow says, Bill, me, right, saying humans will go extinct. Ed asks, why? And Bill answers, because we have no genetic diversity. No, absolutely not. I never said that. And so the question is whether this individual even watched the show. I mean, I don't know where he got that, where he thinks that I'm proposing that humans will disappear because of genetic diversity, of some issue with genetic diversity, supposedly that we lost genetic diversity. And here's another fellow along the same lines, and he says, how much homozygosity is required for mass extinction? And the answer is none. Mass extinctions have nothing to do with genetics. Okay, at least the animals, right? So let's get the idea, at least the basics here. Okay, mass extinction has nothing to do really with genetic diversity. That's got to do with genetic diversity has to do with a background extinction, the extinction of one species, a single species. Okay, mass extinction, it's an economic collapse. That's what a mass extinction is. Okay, it's the elimination of an entire food chain. Okay, animals which are dependent on each other. And it's a ecological pyramid overturn. That's the short version, the synthesis of that. And there you have it. The first one is that the plants overturn their pyramid. Okay, their ecological pyramid, their population pyramid, sorry. And why? Because they lose genetic diversity and they are an old species. That's why. So orders of plants, entire orders of plants disappear, and the animals that forged relationships with them for a long time disappear with them. They can't change their eating habits at the last moment. And that's when the ecological pyramid overturns. Okay? And here you have another vision of that. Okay? Again, it's an economic collapse. And one fellow says, economic collapse has never been a factor before in any other species extinction. And the answer is, well, this is what this site proposes. This site says that it has happened. It's always happened that way. It's the only mechanism Mother Nature uses, economic collapse. So you have to understand what an economic collapse means, what that term means. And it's not that the stock market just fell. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the elimination of primary production, and it disappears all by itself. We don't need any asteroids, no volcanoes, none of that stuff, no catastrophic accidents. What happens is the plants are old. They've been around for too long. And so their population pyramid overturns, their genetic diversity disappears, and they whittle out. And as they're whittling out, all the herbivores that relied on that source of food suddenly have trouble finding food. And when they start dying, so do the predators that prey on them. And there you have an example of the Cretaceous terrestrial revolution. What you see there is that the angiosperms displaced specifically the conifers, and within that specifically the cycads. Okay, so it displaced them from the middle of the Cretaceous all the way to the end. And by doing that, by muscling all these plants aside, plants on which the dinosaurs depended, that's how the dinosaurs disappeared, because they could not find enough food for themselves. The forests, the jungles of cycads were disappearing, and probably other conifers that they ate, and they were not eaters of angiosperms, of the flowering plants. Okay? So there you have an example of an economic collapse. That's what economic collapse means. It means the plants disappear because all animals essentially, what they do is they manage resources. What is the resource that all animals manage? Food. Okay, we manage food too. We do it a little different than other animals, but we manage food too. In fact, we produce our own food. And we do it what? We do it only for monetary gain. That's our world. That's the human world. It's not the lion world. It's not the alligator world. It's our world. But it's the same notion. Mother Nature works through economic collapses, and humans, according to this side at least, will disappear because of a grand economic collapse. Okay, once the global economy collapses, global economy collapses, it can't go any further. At some point, it's got to stop and reaches a dead end, starts falling. And what do we mean by that? I mean that money will be no more. You can't use money for anything, any kind of money, no Bitcoin, no gold, no fiat money, nothing. And the only thing of value will be food. You don't trade food in especially in the asphalt jungle. where we live, cities. Okay, mass extinction has nothing to do specifically, directly with genetic diversity, but I do address, and I did address in Ed Dutton's program, I did address as much as I could because, you know, he kind of surprised me going in that direction, but that's the direction the debate went. We went in the direction of genetic diversity, and that's what people want to hear today because that's very popular on everybody's mind. It's out there. The geneticists have become kings out there, kings of science. They call the shots today, and everybody believes them. They say, well, they can't be wrong. You know, I mean, they count all these atoms. They've got to have it right. And no, I'm saying they've got it wrong. And what they've got wrong is, according to me, right, is what everybody out there takes for granted. And that's that species only gain genetic diversity through mutations. So everybody is convinced that any species only gains genetic diversity. And so the question is, if every species gains genetic diversity after thousands of years, why does the human race, all 8 billion of us, have no genetic diversity? We have very, very little genetic diversity, together with all the other mammals. They also have very little genetic diversity, but some have more than others. And we don't have too much compared to other animals. Yeah, specifically, we compared ourselves against the chimps. There are other comparisons out there. We have very little genetic diversity. And you say, how can that be true if we have 8 billion people on the planet and we're producing new people every day? We have all these minute, these small mutations. Don't they add up? And so, yeah, so this is my take there. Mutation rate increases, but what happens, you have all these population bottlenecks and founder effects, which chop off completely whatever genetic diversity you collected, you accumulated. So in the end, you know, this is supposed to be a sawtooth wave, but the point is that we can only lose. Any species can only lose genetic diversity over time. And people have a lot of trouble with that because they say, no, I thought we increased genetic diversity. Well, here we argue the opposite. We don't take that statement for granted, which is what all these geneticists out there believe and pass around. Okay, fellow says that inbreeding is good. Referring again to genetic diversity, says inbreeding can be neutral or even good if done correctly. Okay, you marry your sister, that's good. Okay, I guess it. Selecting the good, purging the bad through a higher mortality rate. That's what he proposes. Okay. And he proposes instead of inbreeding, why don't we try outbreeding? Okay, he says one reason so many issues are happening today might be exactly for the opposite reasons. We are outbreeding so much that we hide all the mutations of every generation into each other, and then they pop out of existence, and they don't die as we now often can save them. Okay, so this is his take on it. Believes that outbreeding is better than inbreeding. I'm sorry, the reverse that. Inbreeding is better than outbreeding. Okay, so we should not marry someone who is very distinct from us or very far away genetically from us. We should marry someone who is much closer to us. And, well, I don't know. I think he's got it wrong. He's got it completely in reverse. I covered that the other day, okay? Another fellow says the following along the same lines. He says, the term clone, again, referring to inbreeding, right, is the answer to genetic diversity in relation to survival. Again, we're not talking about the extinction of man. It's not going to happen because of genetic diversity. I want to again clarify that because people get it wrong. Okay, now it's got to do with the global economic collapse. Nothing to do with genetic diversity or the overturning of the population pyramid. Okay, so in relation to survival, if some harrowing by nature occurs, okay, mankind continues to clone itself. Exactly, that's true. And like apples, show the changes with variety of the same fruit of the tree of life, just different appearances, but the same basic design of survival. Okay, so we're all clones. Okay, he doesn't see a problem with that. He says chimps are endangered. Okay, and need the variety to maintain their environmental existence along with other designs that haven't reached human, vegetable, or other life with lack of genetic diversity. In other words, clones. So he's saying it's good for chimps, or that they need to have this diversity, for otherwise they wouldn't survive. But it turns out that you have other animals that he apparently hasn't touched upon. And the famous one, I guess you could say, is the cheetah. Okay, the cheetahs. And what these animals do is marry amongst themselves, I guess. They've had some problems in the past, apparently, and today they have very, very little genetic diversity. I think it's the animal, at least a four-legged animal with least amount of genetic diversity on the planet, or at least one of them. And here you see from the folks at Berkeley, and they say the following. And this puts genetic diversity in its proper context. It says, loosely, genetic variation is a measure of the genetic differences within a population in which every individual has the same gene version, allele, at a particular location in the genome has less genetic variation for that gene than a population in which many individuals carry different gene versions of at that location. Okay? And a population with no genetic variation in which every individual is genetically identical, essentially, right, cannot evolve in response to environmental or situational changes. Okay, so these folks have in mind what every geneticist spits out there. And they say, well, if you don't have genetic diversity, you're not fit or not as fit to survive if there are environmental or, for example, diseases, changes out there. Okay, that's their argument. And well, I have a lot to say about that. I think it's nonsense. Okay, what they say, what all these geneticists say, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. If, for example, a genetically uniform population were exposed to a new pathogen, there you have it, and did not carry the gene versions necessary to fend off disease, the population would face complete extinction. Okay, I have no problem with that part. I have a problem with the other part, and that's putting it into historical context. That's what no geneticist on planet Earth has ever done. Okay, they don't put it in the proper context. Okay, let's find out. Here we have, same from Berkeley, they talk about the cheetah. Okay, it says, as a species, cheetahs have famously low levels of genetic variation. Yeah, it's pretty famous. Those who have done a little bit of research will find a cheetah immediately in there. This can probably be attributed to what? Do these people know anything about history? To a population bottleneck they experienced around 10,000 years ago, barely avoiding extinction at the end of the last ice age. Okay? However, the situation has worsened in modern times. It's worsened because we have crowded out a lot of these animals in Africa where they are today. So we've crowded them out. In other words, we took away their land, and they have to live in ever smaller spaces. That's essentially the problem today. That's why they say the situation has worsened. The question is the bottleneck. The bottleneck and the founder's effect, that's what created that situation. That's why the cheetahs have very little genetic diversity today, despite the fact that, what are they saying, 10,000 years, they've been creating mutations, I guess, all along. How come all these cheetahs don't have lots of diversity after 10,000 years? That's what you got to ask yourself. I mean, okay, so they had a big crash. Great. And we had 10,000 years for these cheetahs to recover. And today they have hardly any genetic diversity left. Think about that. Okay? Unlike the chimps. Okay? The fact that female cheetahs, very young with many different fathers, they have one here, one there, and the other, okay, helps preserve what little genetic variation the species has left, and could even buy us some time in our efforts conserve these endangered animals. I always say my point on that one, people don't appreciate it, but maybe 99% of the people out there will say I'm wrong and won't like what I have to say, but I say we should kill, murder, assassinate, exterminate all dangerous animals. We don't need them. We don't need lions. We don't need tigers. We don't need elephants. We don't need any alligators, sharks. We don't need any of those animals. Bears, wolves, get rid of them. We have the power. Let's do it. And I'm saying we don't need those animals. And people say, oh, but then you upset the balance of nature. That's like saying that because the woolly mammoth went away, it upset the balance of nature. No, nothing happened. He just went away and we all continued living. In fact, if we upset the balance of nature, like, we removed the lions and now the buffalo and the zebras start multiplying, let's kill them too. We have no use for zebras or buffaloes or dogs out there, the wild dogs or hyenas. None of those animals. We have no use for them whatsoever. Now you say, well, it's nice to have variety. You mean for our pleasure? Is that why we have them out there? Is that why we keep these animals alive? Is that why we conserve them and try to look for species that are on the verge of extinction and try to save them some way? I'm saying we should do the opposite. I mean, if I'm correct and humans are about to become extinct, it is a moot issue whether we kill all animals on Earth that we do not use. We use cows because we eat them, we eat pigs, we eat chickens, no problem there. If you want to make bags out of alligator skins, fine, then, get them into your yard, put an industry and start breeding alligators or crocodiles or whatever. But if we are not going to do something like that, kill them all. We don't need these animals. We don't need sharks. We don't need crocodiles. We don't need lions or tigers. You want to see one? Go to YouTube. You'll find all kinds there. Okay? We don't need them in circuses. We don't need them in zoos. We don't need animals that are dangerous, especially the dangerous ones. But we don't need some of the others either. I mean, we can get rid of all wildlife on Earth. Like it? Good idea? Don't hit me. I know a lot of people will kill me for this saying all that. Okay. So they continue. They say, look, this is what the cheetah does. She goes out and she has different mates, and that expands her diversity, because if she sleeps with this one and that one, has kids with each one, well, all these kids are going to be a little different. But if they come out of a single parent, a single father, well, then you don't have much diversity in there. That's their argument. And so they're trying to save the cheetah. Okay? I'm not sure it's... oh, by the way, I say that we're doing them a favor if we exterminate them, by the way. And you say, well, how's that doing them a favor? Killing them is doing them a favor? Yeah, because, see, then they don't suffer that slow death that Mother Nature has planned for them, where they're disappearing little by little. And here are the humans trying to save each one. On life, they're putting all these animals on life support, with little tubes down their mouth to see if they live. And the guy's on the operating table there dying and say, no, let them live, let them live. It's the last species on Earth, No, you don't want them to die a slow death. It's I think that's more painful than just liquidating all of them. And then if you want to watch a lion, you got to do it like you watch the mammoth. You go to YouTube or whatever, and maybe a movie or documentary, and you watch the animal how it used to be. How's that? Are we going to preserve the lions for the next million years? Is that what these people think? Okay, let's see if we can preserve ourselves for 1,000,000 years first. Okay, which is another issue, which is really a more pressing issue. Okay, another fellow says, humans started when the Bible said, right? Okay, God made two people and they're the end. Okay, every species starts out like this. How could we have less genetic diversity than the original two? Okay, when you have sex, the notion is you will get more genetic diversity. When a species started inbreeding is when there were less of a species made. When did the species, in any case, in any sense of species, ever get less made? Okay, so again, it's got to do with this notion. He probably missed the talk the other day. I said that, yeah, mutations accumulate, but they accumulate incrementally, very little. It takes centuries, like I said the other day, it takes centuries to create quite a bit of genetic diversity through mutations. And then here comes a disease, it just wipes out half of humanity. A big bottleneck. Well, all that genetic diversity is lost. The other issue is that you don't even have to wait for a catastrophe of that nature, gargantuan catastrophe. All you got to look at is that until the beginning of the 19th century, half of the children below the age of 5 died. Our forefathers saw death much more often than we do today. Today we live to the age of 100. The old days, very few people lived to the age of the 100, except the ones in the Bible. Methuselah, so they lived a long time. But people lived only to the average at the turn of the 20th century was 40 years old, because so many kids died young. And they died of what? Of childhood diseases. In other words, we had not reached an agreement with endemic diseases that were around in those days. Today, nobody dies of endemic diseases. We've conquered them all, essentially. Either through vaccines, if that's what you believe in, or through our natural selection, the fact that those forefathers who could not withstand the diseases died, and those who could gave birth to us. That's the way it works. Okay, so so let's look at what a bottleneck is. Here we have a population bottleneck. Let's find out what this means, for those of you who are not familiar. An event that drastically reduces the size of a population. Chops off half the population, like, the 14th century bubonic plague wiped out between a third and half of Europe. And so all that genetic diversity that we accumulated through mutations was chopped off in one shot. What was it? 1348. I think it lasted like 3 or 4 years. And wiped out anywhere from a third to a half of the population of Europe. Those are the numbers that we get from the little villages where they do the census. Who died, who didn't. That's more or less the numbers they came up with. Okay, the typical causes are environmental disaster. That could happen, sudden, something that happens suddenly. Okay, overpredation. You could be overhunting. I think that's less likely. Maybe that's only applicable to man. Habitat destruction. We do a lot of that. We crowd out all the other, especially the wild species. And disease. Disease is the number one, and that's the one that always kept us in check. Humans. Okay, it was disease. Okay. Okay, and the other issue is founder effect. Okay, so we have population bottleneck and the founder effect. And that's a reduction in genetic variation that results when a small subset of a large population is used to establish a new colony. In other words, you have a branching out of a group from the main trunk. Okay, and I'm saying that's what happened. That's how Neanderthal came to be. You had Homo erectus. He walked all the way to Great Britain or thereabouts, maybe France, maybe Spain. From there came another level of human-like or hominid, which was antecessor, possibly together with Heidelberg, man of Heidelberg, Homo heidelbergensis. And from that, we have Neanderthal. And what we're saying here is that these were branches that came out. Heidelberg came out of a branch from the main trunk, which was Homo erectus. And then Neanderthal came out of a branch of Heidelberg. That's the assumption I make. That's the theory and the assumption I work with. Okay, so Neanderthal was born in Europe, but his great-grandfather was Homo erectus, which was our great-grandfather. That's more or less the story. Ours was a great-grandfather in Africa, and Neanderthal had this great-grandfather Homo erectus in Europe, in Arctic Europe. And so I think that's how these two species came to be. We were two different species. And that's what the founder effect is. A group branches out from the main trunk, encounters a new environment, okay, and new lands, etc., new diseases, okay, new predators, new possible plants, if that's, or even animals that they hunted. And then you see the little picture shows you, how that's done, how that's how Mother Nature selects species or makes species, okay? And I think that's how we came to be. Okay, let's continue here. I'm saying that humans now, because of this lengthy process, have lost genetic diversity. They lost genetic diversity. Why? Because we had lots of population bottlenecks followed by founders effects, and that streamlines our genetic code. And I'm saying that because of that, we have very rare diseases today, mental problems today that you see out there. Okay, and here's a specific example, and it's Siamese twins. Okay, now one fellow says, well, Siamese twins in the old days, perhaps women didn't want to show that to the doctor or to their husband or whatever, and just drown the thing in the river. Okay, it could have happened. That's true, but I doubt that. I think that what happened here was that it wasn't documented because I think it's a modern problem. Two-headed children, or conjoined twins in some way through their shoulders or their pelvis or whatever. I think these are genetic problems, and they are genetic problems that come when a species loses its genetic diversity. And I was saying some time back that I have a peach tree, and I found that 5 of the peaches came out as Siamese. And I gather from this that the peach is a very old plant, and that more or less was confirmed to me when I found out that the original peaches were the size of a grape. And it's through a mixture of natural selection and artificial selection that we made the peaches to what they are today, more or less a tennis ball size. And that's how they used to be. And today, now they're big. They're old plants. They're big plants for what they used to be. And now we're having two-headed peaches. And not only peaches, we have a lot of Siamese fruits and veggies out there. You can look them up. Just Google Siamese veggies and fruits, and you'll find there's quite a bit today. Why? Because all these plants have lost their genetic diversity for the most part. Okay, it says this is the first case that I can find that you can more or less put your hand in the fire for. It's not a direct proof because it's Theophanes, and he talked about what George Syncellus wrote, friend of his, and they got it. They didn't get it firsthand. They got it from probably one of these two guys from the 4th century, because they're talking about something that happened in the 4th century. So they weren't the first ones to see it, but if you look at that, if you read that, it'll say, that they found two, I guess a boy and a girl that were united in some way. And one died and the other one died 4 days later, which is pretty much what happens to a lot of Siamese twins. And this case, assuming this is the first case or one of the first cases documented, you're talking about the 4th century. If this happened then and nobody else talked too much about these things, it's because we didn't have that many cases at all, or maybe a couple on Earth. And today we're having a whole bunch of these. We have, if you look up Siamese twins, we're getting a lot of them. Why? Because we lost our genetic diversity. That's my argument. Okay? And this is the more, I guess, the one that you can put your hand in the fire for. This one was testified by a lot of people, witnessed by a lot of people, and it's two gals in Hungary who were conjoined at the hip or the pelvis. So these are modern problems. And remember, again, very few cases in the 19th century. If you look it up, you'll find that there are a lot more cases today. Look at conjoined twins. Look them up, and you'll find that it's a problem that's increasing. You're seeing more and more. Now you might say, well, the population has increased, which is also true. The question is, we're having more cases, and the question is, this is just an issue of the fact that we write about it today and take pictures because it's an unusual event, or is it that we are actually having more and more cases because we have genetic problems? And I keep mentioning the Amish who've been married inbreeding for 300 years, and they're having all kinds of genetic problems. So inbreeding is not a good idea, as these other fellows suggest. They think it's better to do inbreeding than outbreeding. I would say that I discourage it completely. Don't sleep with your sister.